Hi, I'm Josh, and I am so grateful you've decided to spend some of your very valuable leisure time with me as I talk about books with the mid-year freak out tag. Now, admittedly, there's no freaking out going on here. I assume it's called the freak out tag because a lot of booktubers like to set reading goals for the year, and then you get to the middle of the year and they're going, oh no, we're halfway through the year and I still have all these goals to meet and whatnot. But for me personally, reading is 100% about fun and enjoyment and 0% about setting goals. So even though there are no goals and no freaking out, there are a lot of interesting questions to answer here. So let's get right into it. I'm going to answer prompt number 1 alongside prompt number 7, because number 1 is best book you've read so far in 2022, and number 7 is favorite new author, debut or new to you. And they both come together when I answer that the best book I've read in 2022 so far is the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. It doesn't make any sense for me to pick a single book from that trilogy because it's all one story, so I tend to think of series as basically whole works and not individual parts. But anyways, the First Law trilogy, if you saw that huge review I put up about the trilogy, instantly became my number 1 favorite fantasy fiction of all time. Now, having said that, not long afterwards, I read the Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor, and to spoil that review that is upcoming, I will say I was conflicted because I was like, this could also be my number 1 fantasy fiction of all time. Even though The First Law and Strange the Dreamer are entirely different fantasy books, they're really not similar in any way. They both are just incredibly amazing at what they do. Ultimately, though, I think I will have to put one of these two up front, and you'll have to wait for my Strange the Dreamer duology spoiler-free review to see which one wins out. Moving on to number 2. Best sequel you've read so far in 2022. Now, in the first half of this year, I've read 3 series, and I tend to read through a series kind of all at once. What I don't do is read one book of a series, move on, read other stuff, come back to the second one, move on, or even have multiple things going at once. I like to focus on one book at a time and one series at a time. So as a result, I'll once again have to highlight the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie and the Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor, but I also want to highlight another really amazing trilogy that I read, and that is the first trilogy of the Seven Waters series by Juliette Marillier. Book 1 was a perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Books 2 and 3 were 9 and 8 out of 10, so not quite as good as that first book, but they held up very well as sequels, so I'm going to sort of highlight those in terms of the series I've read rather than an individual sequel. I'm also going to combine prompts 3 and 4 together for this next one. Number 3 is new release you haven't read yet but want to. Number 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I don't necessarily keep too close track of new releases that are coming out or that are upcoming, so I really don't know what's coming out when. However, when I do come across a book that sounds really interesting, that is the beginning of a series, and that series is not yet complete, I will add it to my TBR and let it sit there until the series is finished before I then go and check it out. For a couple of reasons. One, I've been burned by Patrick Rothfuss and the Kingkiller Chronicles. I do not want to start a series that may never be finished. And secondly, I do want to make sure that that series has held up to the end of it before I decide to spend my time reading it. So I will wait to see what booktubers and reviewers have to say about it before I make that final decision. However, I will list real quickly the series that I'm currently keeping an eye on that are not yet complete, that there's a high chance I'll end up reading when they are completed. And for each of these series, I'll just quickly show the first book in the series as I mention them. So we have The God King Chronicles by Mike Brooks, the Black Tongue series by Christopher Buehlman, the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers, the Half Tales trilogy by Pale E.K. Oswald, the Lost Queen trilogy by Signe Pike, the Riven World series by M.L. Spencer, and finally the Darkwater Legacy series by Chris Wooding. All of these have at least first books that have caught my interest, and we'll wait and see how things turn out to see if I ultimately end up reading them. Number 5 is Biggest Disappointment so far this year. And that is actually going to be the subject of my next book review, which is going to be a 2-book look at 2 books that were written by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Armageddon in Retrospect and We Are What We Pretend to Be. Stay tuned for that upcoming review to see why these were such big disappointments, but I will say that the nonfiction collections of Kurt Vonnegut's essays and speeches and various writings are literally my favorite books across all genres, and when you have that high a bar, it is easy, I guess, to be disappointed, but I will get more into that in that review that will be coming out in the near future. Number 6 is Biggest Surprise, and for this one, I am going to say the Strange the Dreamer duology that is comprised of Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. I came into this duology knowing absolutely nothing about it other than it was supposedly very well written. And again, this is another upcoming review that I'm going to get into. This is probably going to be another very long review because of how much I ended up loving this duology, but I was blown away by it. I did not know what to expect coming into it, but whatever it was that I thought I was going to experience really was blown away by the actual experience of reading these 2 books. I will mention that they were a lot heavier on the romance than I'm used to reading. It's not something that I tend to come across a lot in the types of books that I read, but it ended up working very well in this series, and these 2 books just were amazing. Stay tuned again for more about those in the near future. Number 8 is Newest Fictional Crush or Favorite Romance. And since I just talked about it, I'm going to go with the Strange the Dreamer duology. The romance that was kind of the central part of those books I thought was well done. It was a romance between 2 young characters who were kind of experiencing love and the physical affection of love for the first time and exploring it together, and it could have easily come off as cheesy and a little bit hard to deal with, but the way it was done, it worked really well in the context of the books, I think. Number 9 is Newest Favorite Character, and I will say that the characters from the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie were all just so well done. That was just one of the amazing things about this trilogy, was just how unique and interesting each individual character was, and just the individual character arcs they had and the journeys they went on was just so amazing. One standout character, obviously, for anyone who's read this trilogy, is Sand Dan Glokta. I relate to that guy so much, having been through so much trauma and physical pain and disability and all that stuff. I talked all about it in my very lengthy review of the First Law trilogy, but he's one that I relate to a lot. I think in terms of character arcs, though, the arc that I forget his name, I'm gonna have to put it here for you to see, but this character just went on a very interesting process of development and then kind of revertment back, and just the way that he sort of progressed and regressed as a character was so interesting. So there were a couple that were definitely favorites in terms of characters. And I'm learning more and more that I'm very much a character-driven reader. Give me great characters and great dialogue over big, interesting events any day of the week. I mean, you need both for an interesting book, but that's definitely what I tend to be drawn to. Before I carry on with this, let me just take a quick second to thank my Patreon supporters, especially to my higher tier supporters, Joanna, Paul, and Asmondas Pervect. Your support is everything to me. I just appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. Now, number 10 is Book That Made You Cry. This was tough for me because I tend not to get overly emotional when I read books. I haven't really cried since the day I found out my wife was leaving me 2.5 years ago, so it tends not to be how I express myself emotionally necessarily, but I decided the best I could do was a book called Estoril by Dejan Tiago Stankovic. There's a younger boy who is kind of the main character in the story. He starts out at roughly 8 or so years old, and the book takes place over the course of 5 or 6 years. And he has a bit of a tragic story that definitely made me feel kind of bad for the kid. And while it was very interesting and a delightful book, it was also kind of melancholic at the same time in terms of just kind of what this young guy had to experience. On the flip side of that is number 11, which is a book that made you happy. And for this one, I will choose The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. It is just such a delightful little book. It has this male-male romance that is just so sweet and beautiful, and everything about it is a feel-good experience ultimately at the end of the day, so I couldn't help but pick that for number 11. Number 12 is favorite book to film adaptation you saw this year, and I have seen 0 of these this year. The last one that I saw was when I watched the new Dune movie at the end of 2021, and I talked about that when I did my review of the first 3 Dune books along with the film in another longer video that I did either at the end of 2021 or beginning of this year. And ultimately I did really enjoy the Dune movie. There were some things I felt could have been done better, obviously, but I thought it was a very good adaptation of at least the first half of the first book. Question 13 is some self-promotion. Favorite video you have done so far this year? And for this, I will choose a video that was called Josh Yaks about his books read in 2021. The best, the worst, and interesting stats. That's one that I posted on the 19th of January, 2022, right at the beginning of this year. I thought it was an interesting look back at the year in reading for 2021. And I will say that now that we're at the midpoint of 2022, like a Ramon song, 2020, 24 hours to go, I want to be sedated. And I will say now that we're at the midpoint of 2022 that this year is shaping up to be the best year I've had in reading ever. So I'm at a good place so far with my reading this year. Number 14, most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. And this is one that I showed off in a previous book haul video, and this is the first special edition books that I've ever purchased for myself. And the reason I was able to purchase them was because I had a gift certificate that I had received, and I used it to splurge and treat myself to the special edition of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. These are beautiful hardcover books that come in this book sleeve. They have beautiful colored illustrations, and if I get around to a Lord of the Rings reread at some point, I'll definitely be reading from these editions and enjoying the illustrations in them. The final prompt here, number 15, is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And there aren't any I need to read by the end of the year, but I'll just let you know what's kind of on the radar for the books that I plan to be diving into in the near future. And because of the amazing books I've read at the beginning of this year, I have some that I've gone out and purchased for upcoming reading. And so because I enjoyed the first trilogy of the Seven Waters series by Juliette Marillier, I've gone out and purchased the 3 books of the second trilogy, so those are on my shelf waiting my attention. Again, because I enjoyed The First Law so incredibly much by Joe Abercrombie, I've gone and started to purchase the standalone novels that kind of happen in between the 2 trilogies, so I will definitely be making my way through the rest of Joe Abercrombie's catalog, getting through the standalones, and then diving into his second trilogy at some point in the future. I have a couple of books by Lois McMaster Bujold that were my most recent purchases that were a result of Zara from Books with Zara raving about them, and those are The Curse of Chalion and Paladin of Souls. I just picked those up. Those are waiting my attention. And then I have 3 other books on my shelf that are the first books of series that I picked up to try out the series and see if they looked good enough to continue on with the series. So I have the first book of John Gwynn's The Faithful and the Fallen series. I have the first book of Brian McClellan's The Powder Mage trilogy, and then I have the first book of Anthony Ryan's Raven's Shadow trilogy, although that last one I'm kind of regretting a bit, having looked at reviews on Goodreads. It appears that that first book is an amazing book, and then book 2 is disappointing, and then book 3 is downright bad based on the general consensus of reviews I've read. So I don't know if I'll devote my time to that trilogy or not, although Yolene from Yolene Reads seems to think it's worthwhile getting through the trilogy, and she is somebody whose opinion I respect a lot when it comes to fantasy reading. So I will finish off by tagging a bunch of other booktubers to do this mid-year freakout tag, and some of these people I'm quite certain have done it already, but I was too lazy to go back and see if they have or not, and it's quite possible I've already watched your mid-year freakout tag videos, but I'm going to list all these people quickly. Sam from The Teapot Reads, Yolene from Yolene Reads, Dan from Treebeard Book Reviews, Chaz from Bookish Chaz, Zara from Books with Zara, Robin from Bookends and Biscuits, Maria from Tea Books Magic, Theo from Rekindled Reader, Bryce from Shelf Centered. If any of you are interested in doing this tag, I'd be very curious to hear your answers, and you are tagged if you are a YouTuber and this sounds like a fun tag to do. Please don't let not being named in person stop you from making the video. And anybody who does go out and tackles this tag and makes a video, please link below your video so I can go and check it out. And then before I wrap up here, how is 2022 going for you in terms of reading? Please take a minute to comment and tell me how your year's been going. Has it been a good year or a bad year for reading for you? And what has been the single best book you've read so far this year? I would love to know that. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, it's Josh. You know why I'm here. Sometimes you just need that friendly reminder to give a little thumb up, to subscribe to the channel, to share the video with somebody who would enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Where's my fucking... And number 7 is favorite new author debut. And like I said, they did not. I'm also going to are the Darkwater series by the Darkwater, like how they turn halfway through 2022